Thank you, Professor Najri, and thanks for everyone. I hope we have all of our panelists on board. Yes, we have them. So my name is Kashyap Kumpella, and I am the CEO of an industry analyst firm called RPA to AI Research. So currently, I advise private and public sector in helping make use of AI in their organizations. But about 10 years ago, I was interested in sustainable energy, and I was looking at smart grids, sustainable energy, and more importantly, equitable access to energy resources. And as the adoption of AI has increased in the last 3 years, I've also been looking at the field of ethical AI. So I'm really looking forward to today's panel on AI and sustainability development goals, which combines both of these areas. So let me set the context for artificial intelligence and why this topic is important. Artificial intelligence, and when I say that, I refer specifically to narrow artificial intelligence, which is a set of technologies that uses big data analytics and machine learning techniques such as neural networks. So in the last few years, such AI has become quite capable in a variety of areas. And its importance is growing and its impact is being felt. So that impact is beneficial in many ways. There is increased efficiency, growth in profits for companies, and all of this contributes to societal well-being. And not just such economic benefits. AI can also be used to address global challenges, which have been very well outlined in the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. For example, AI holds great promise to combat climate change, reduce pollution, increase crop yields, and improve the infrastructure of our cities to make living better for urban citizens. Also, there is great promise and potential in increasing access to healthcare, personalizing education, etc. AI is a horizontal technology, and the applications are quite limitless. And all of these are very closely aligned to the sustainability development goals. So that's the good part. However, AI can also pose some serious worries and ethical concerns. For example, job losses to automation, worries about that, entrenching existing inequities in our societies, algorithmic bias, privacy violations, and surveillance. So if AI is not implemented carefully, there is that risk of undoing the progress we are making towards SDGs. So it's a complex and very nuanced topic. And we have a wonderful panel today. Experts from the fields of governance, sustainability, policy, finance, and technology are all here to help us look at this issue from multiple dimensions. So today's format is each of our speakers has chosen two SDGs in which they're experts in and are very close to their heart. So they will provide insights on the significance of the SDG, what are the opportunities that AI enables for that specific SDG, and whether AI creates any challenges in progress towards that SDG. So without much further ado, let me kick off this panel. And I invite Dr. Agdan to open this panel by talking about SDG 16. Sir, please introduce yourself, tell us about the work you do, and tell us about the big picture on the SDG and what excites you about this SDG. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kashyap. I run a management consulting firm in Istanbul, and I also serve on the boards of a number of different companies in different countries. And I'm the chairman of Rothschilds in the country as well. And since the inception of our company about 30 years ago, we spend one day a week for nonprofit work. So social capital is very important for us, and we try to develop that. And as a matter of fact, our company, Sdg Consulting, is the first signatory of the UN Global Compact in the country. And I have served as the chairman of the local network, as well as the global chair of all the local networks, and served on the board of the UN Global Compact. Under that role, I've been quite involved with the development of the SDGs, and through that process, starting from Rio +20 all the way to Paris Climate Conference and so forth. And our firm has served as B20 knowledge partner for governance and sustainability while Turkey was heading the G20. So we are quite involved with these areas in a way. And what I would like to say is that having almost 200 countries sign on 17 SDGs is a huge feat that was accomplished in 2015. It's not very easy to get so many different countries to agree on so many different topics at the same time. However, perhaps it has been a bit too many SDGs, although all of them are quite important. And more interestingly, there are 169 areas where under these 17 areas. So it is a quite cumbersome system. And if you don't measure, you don't improve. And according to one of the estimates, measuring all of these 169 areas in all the countries requires over $250 billion, ignoring the opportunity costs just for measuring. This is almost impossible to do. And therefore, unfortunately, the measurement and therefore the development is not moving as fast as we need them to move. We have recently conducted research on global sustainability leaders, which are about over 200 companies from 7 different stock exchanges, all of which are members of the Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, and who made it to the sustainability indices in their relevant stock exchanges. And what we see in this area is that more companies, especially these leaders, are starting to align their strategies with the SDGs. But in terms of reporting their results, there's a gap of over 20% with incorporating this strategy versus measuring and reporting on the results. Although from our last year's research, the movement is in the positive area. People are trying to do more over a period of time. However, we should not ignore the fact that it has been almost it's been 5 years since 2015. So 1/3 of the goal to 2030 has passed, and we are way far away from where we need to achieve. So when we come to AI, AI could be quite useful in a number of different areas. One of them is it would enhance the capacity for measurement in these areas, because measurement is key for improvement. And second, it could have the potential of reducing the cost of data collection and analysis, which is very important as well. And finally, as you mentioned, with respect to many different SDGs, one could embed AI solutions within direct interventions more effectively. When we come to SDG 16 in particular, SDG 16 is about good governance in a nutshell. And good governance requires inclusive stakeholder engagement. Good governance requires evidence-based decision-making. And good governance requires good collaboration between international, national, and local bodies and so forth as well. And AI could definitely help, especially with regards to evidence-based, improving evidence-based decision-making, which is very important for all the SDGs and as well as our well-being, because if you don't have evidence, then it becomes a trial and error type of approach. And especially with governments who have so much resources and so much power, trials without really knowing exactly what's going to happen could be quite costly. One other area that I would like to focus on is that ex post evaluations of policies, unfortunately, are not conducted in many different countries or companies or with many actions. What this does is it reduces our ability to learn faster. AI could be quite beneficial with respect to speeding up global learning by making sure that wherever the tests or different trials are made, we can have the impacts measured better and also shared more easily. It could also have some specific advantages. For example, one of the areas of the SDG 16 is avoiding bribery and tax avoidance and so forth. Obviously, AI could identify patterns and could help the governments identify these kinds of problems much sooner than otherwise, and could help prevent. However, there are ethical dilemmas as well. If those algorithms that are developed to identify those are captured by those who wish to do the bribery and so forth, it might actually make that process more efficient, unfortunately. So we have to be very careful about this as well. So the ethics of AI, I think, is extremely critical, both with respect to making sure that we don't increase the current biases that we have around the world, as well as to make sure that these new tools that are developed by AI are not captured by the wrongdoers, but rather utilized for the good of the society. One of the areas that we need to totally focus on is continuous automatic monitoring and auditing, in a way, to make the AI systems, because they become too complex. Very few people understand all of them. Even right now, millions of decisions are made for the people by AI in many areas. And if those are not monitored properly, they could be utilized in a very wrong manner as well. Just as we have seen the internet. When internet first started, we all thought that it would help develop the democracy better by making information accessible and making sure that everybody can have a say and so forth. But as we have seen in the Cambridge Analytica case, if it is not used properly, rather than making a level ground and better understanding of each other through technology, what it did was to bury everybody within their biases, and actually enabled manipulation of democracy rather than improving democracy. So we have to be extremely careful with respect to how we deal with AI. And there are very good projects and principles that are being put forward by the OECD, EU, and so forth. There's been a lot of intellectual capital put in there. However, the key is implementation. And unless we have automatic auditing and continual observation of how we are developing and how we are utilizing AI, we may face a similar thing like the Cambridge Analytica, and even at a bigger scale with the utilization of AI. AI is a very powerful tool, but it has to be controlled and utilized properly for a better world. And we definitely need to do this, because otherwise we are not going to reach the SDGs, which are very critical for the livelihood of the humanity as well as the planet. Let me stop here and wait for the other colleagues before going to the second round. Thank you very much, Kasia.
Thank you, Dr. Agdan. That's fascinating. I think you packed so many insights. It was like very insight density is very high in your 5 minutes of speech. So my main takeaway is what I really liked was how you explained the significance of 200 countries coming together. That's no mean achievement, but you also struck a very realistic tone on how the pace of progress could have been much, much faster. We also take away that AI in the hands of the bad guys, that is something we need to watch out for. At the same time, the ease of measurements, and not only the measurements, but also being able to share it much more widely so progress is faster. And I agree with you that it's a dual-edged sword and we need to pay attention. It's like fire, it can burn you if you're not careful. So thank you for that. I look forward to your insights in the next round. So next, I'd invite Paul Smith. So I proudly display against my name, Kashyap Kumpilla CFA, and I got that charter when Paul was the president of the CFA Institute. So Paul, take it away. Please introduce yourself and talk about the SDGs that are close to your heart.
Thank you, Kasia. I don't know if my video is on.
No, it is not.
So have you turned it on? Aha.
Now it is.
Are we on? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can see
Perfect.
and we can hear you.
Good. Kasia, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And at CFA, we wwere very proud to welcome you as a member of our community. So thank you very much for struggling through those exams. Nowadays, I retired from the CFA at the end of 2019, and now I act as an independent director and also a collaborating author with Dr. Agdan and one of his colleagues, Kubra Koldemir, who will talk to us later, all around the idea really of purpose in finance. One of the things that we were absolutely passionate about at CFA Institute was trying to connect financial activity with a broader purpose than just enriching ourselves. And if you look at a lot of the surveys around the financial services industry and the way that people view financial services professionals, you'll see that the level of trust in finance is very low. And one of the themes that we tried to exploit under my presidency was how can finance reattach itself to a greater sense of purpose to help resolve through finance some of the challenges that the world faces. And one of those challenges, really, one of the biggest challenges that the world faces is equal opportunity, equal access, and fairness, really. And I think that's where SDG 2 comes in, and it's one of the ones that I'm most passionate about. SDG 2 is about hunger, is about ending hunger and achieving food security for all, improved nutrition for everybody, and to promote sustainable agriculture. And there is nothing, I think, that touches upon the human condition and the future of mankind more keenly than SDG 2 does. The key issue that we face as a world is the widening disparity between those that have a significant stake in our society and those that don't. And food security is the most basic expression of that challenge. And I think wherever one looks, the reason why I'm particularly passionate about equal access and equal opportunity is that wherever one looks in the world, you see a challenge that our political systems, whether they're democratic or not, but our political systems are being pulled apart by populism and other movements that are really based around trying to exploit the challenge that most people feel today in society, that the rewards that are being generated by an ever wealthier world are not being evenly spread. And so when you think about the US presidential election, for instance, Brexit in the UK, where I come from, the challenges in Poland and Hungary at the moment, in some senses, for Kasia, Modi's India, perhaps Brazil, all of these countries face real challenges around the equal distribution of wealth and trying to bring all of their people forward at a reasonable pace. And COVID, of course, has made this even more challenging. Prior to COVID, it was estimated that 26% of the world's population is food insecure, 26%. So, roughly speaking, 2 billion people. And 21% of the children in this world, our future, are malnourished. And that's not just a developing market issue, that's also a developed market issue. If you think, for instance, again, going back to Britain, where I come from, one of our football players, Marcus Rashford, maintained a very strong campaign within the last 3 months to make sure that during COVID, children from poorer homes who don't have access to adequate nutrition are continued to be fed by their schools during their school holiday periods. So when we think about food security, when we think about malnutrition, it's not, or child malnutrition, it's not just an issue for the developing world, it's also an issue that is very real in a lot of developed societies today. And food nutrition, of course, impacts the way that children learn. It affects the concentration that they can put into their studies, and obviously it affects their health for their lives, and that clearly has an impact on medical bills that society needs to face as those children grow up and become adults. So childhood malnutrition, food security, I think are self-evidently two of the biggest issues that we have today. And I think the challenge with food security is it also blends into physical security. And I know there is another SDG goal on water security, but obviously water and water management is key to sustainable agriculture, which is part of SDG 2. And when one thinks about what's going on in the world, whether it's the clash between India and China over the Tibetan Plateau, the Mekong River in Southeast Asia, the Nile Valley, the River Jordan, the wars of tomorrow are primarily going to be caused by a fight to secure water supply, which obviously is mainly focused around agriculture, although power comes into that as well. So it's the health of future generations. It's trying to make sure that society sticks together today, and it's also conflict resolution and conflict management going forward. And then on top of that, of course, we have the challenge that is global warming. That again adds an extra layer of challenge to this SDG. And we have finally man-made challenges around this as well. When you look at the deforestation of the Amazon, palm oil plantations in Papua New Guinea, forest fires in Australia and in California, you see that all of these subjects are somewhat interconnected, and securing the planet's food supply and an equal distribution of that food supply is going to be absolutely vital to ourselves going forward. And within that challenge, artificial intelligence has a absolutely key role to play. When you think about improving food supply chains, for instance, and the work of AI around making sure that food supply chains are optimized and maximized, that's one key usage of that, and that bleeds into waste management of food. As we all know, something like 20% of the world's food supply is wasted every year. Better supply chain management, better management of food resources within countries through AI will help resolve some of the challenges that we face today. In addition to that, obviously, AI has an important role to play in terms of synthetic food and in terms of bioengineering, key ways of increasing crop yield, as well as alternative substitutes where resources are constrained in terms of animal husbandry, etc. And it also has a very key role to play in terms of the prediction of consumption of water and power, the regulation of that consumption, and the optimization and storage of both water and power in terms of future usage. So AI has an absolutely vital role to play in terms of all of the issues around supply chain management, whether it's the physical movement of goods or also whether it's the movement of the water and the power used to generate that. Some of the more obscure work that's being done through AI is also very interesting. For instance, through satellite imagery, mapping the way that the world actually works. Where are poverty hotspots, for instance? Through satellite imagery, you can tell that through electricity usage, cars, urban development. Satellite imagery is now being used very heavily to monitor the way that poverty is either increasing or receding in areas of the globe. And AI, again, has a very crucial role to play in terms of poverty eradication that fits in with this SDG. Some of the challenges, I think Dr. Agdan really covered the waterfront as far as the challenges are concerned. But obviously, we've got the ethics of bioengineering. That's a big subject that is constantly being talked about in terms of whether we are, in terms of the way we look at animal husbandry, what are the ethics around that? The misuse of data around poverty. Clearly, there's data privacy issues there. There's human exploitation issues as far as that's concerned. And then I would support Dr. Agdan's point about the misuse of data around AI. Again, when one thinks of the security issues around water supply management, for instance, that concerns me most, that the countries that are able to maximize their ability around predicting water supply and consumption can misuse that information for offensive as opposed for sharing resource reasons. So I think concerns over the misuse of AI are very well founded indeed. So Kashyap, I'm going to stop there and hand the baton over to our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I think you hit a lot of notes out there. You explained the interconnected nature of the various issues and challenges that confront us, and also the sense of urgency that we need to have because of COVID. I picked up something you said, and that's a quote I usually give out, which says, the future wars are going to be fought over water, but maybe they will be fought with AI.
Yes. Well,
so I also noted a lot of the applications around supply chain optimization, precision agriculture, better management of resources. So we use all of that stuff, satellite imagery. So lots of very interesting things out there. So next, it's my distinct pleasure to invite Kubra Kuldemir, who is a sustainability researcher and very passionate about many of the sustainability goals and has done a tremendous work in sustainability research. So without further ado, let me invite Kubra to introduce herself and speak about inclusive growth and work. Kubra, over to you.
Thank you, Kashyap. Everybody can hear me, right? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, my name is Kubra. I'm sustainability researcher at Agdan Governance Academy, and currently I'm based in Istanbul. In the past, I used to be emerging markets analyst in New York City. I used to work for a hedge fund before. At the moment, at the Academy, we are working on a series of articles, actually Dr. Agdan, Paul, Mohan, we are all engaged and we are all authors of this writing initiative. So we may also be referring to our articles. I will talk about SDG 8. It is decent work for all, but I thought that it would be helpful maybe first to start mentioning about an example to demonstrate why SDG 8 is so important. So we live in a world where we often talk about economic imbalances. Imbalances in our society, unfortunately, are impacting almost in every sphere of our daily activities. And they are impacting livelihoods as well. Through some of the divides in our societies, we constantly hear about individuals who feel disenfranchised, both economically, sometimes politically. So COVID-19 is making these injustices even worse because these days individuals who have enough savings, for example, who are able to protect their health, they can weather this environment by staying at home, working remotely from safety. On the other hand, we have a lot of people who don't have maybe enough savings, so they are living day by day. And even during this dangerous pandemic, they are going out to survive, taking any jobs available, endangering their health. Okay, so this is something actually that we all are talking about these days. And I just wanted to show this as an example about why we should really ambitiously pursue SDG 8 and why it's so important. So SDG 8 in short is about promoting sustainable and inclusive economic growth and reaching full and productive employment. And it's about decent work for all. Just because I happen to be associated a bit more with the financial sector, I would like to give some examples about what people in the financial sector could do to promote this SDG. And then I will also mention about where AI could be helpful or where it's maybe less helpful. SDG 8, SDG 8 promotes financing corporations that have a purpose. And it has also a positive impact on society, cares about inclusion. So several action points for the financial sector individuals, professionals would be that we need to first make sure that funds are channeled in a way that infrastructure investments are responding also to the needs of low-income users, of women, of marginalized groups with disabilities, indigenous people, and even people from various racial and ethnic minorities. Also, investments need to be inclusive in the sense that they need to include microfinance, for example, credit and insurance products for small business owners as well. And also engagement, we need to be engaged in diversified sources of capital. For example, fintech or crowdfunding, impact investing, all of these could also really help reach areas of financing where we couldn't reach before. Now, how does AI relate to all of this conversation? SDG 8 is expected to promote, first of all, higher levels of economic activity. So that's one of the ambitions. There's an upside here related to AI because there are various studies that are suggesting that AI can add up to 10% of GDP in the next 10 to 15 years. That is great news. However, most of the times when AI is involved, sometimes when AI is involved, large corporations can afford those technologies better. And then there's a risk that large corporations will benefit from that share, the higher share of that economic growth that's coming from AI, and smaller companies don't benefit from as much. It's kind of similar to the divergence we are seeing currently in the stock market. I mean, you know, there was a meltdown at the beginning of this year because of COVID, but then what happened? The stock market recovered very fast, but can we say the same thing for actually for many people's lives? Probably not necessarily. People who own small businesses, they haven't really recovered, or if somebody had lost a position, probably they may not necessarily be doing much better. So, so that's one area. And then another area though, where SDG 8 is also expected to promote policies that will lead to financial inclusion. And maybe this is one area where we could really see positive influence from AI. Why? Because, for example, fintech can really benefit from AI, and other alternative sources like impact investing and crowdfunding, they could also benefit from this type of technologies. So, and this could help financial inclusion. And just like Paul has said earlier, what is one of the main issues in finance is that there's not enough trust. Trust levels are low. And one of the ways of fixing this problem is to make sure that financial professionals are actually guiding the funds into where they can really make a change. And maybe AI, if it's really helping financial inclusion, maybe this could be good news that it could really help solve one problem.
Thanks, Kubra. I have a quick follow-up question. You mentioned some research articles, sustainability research articles, etc. So if our audience wanted to find them, where could they find them? Maybe you could type it in the chat message where people can find your work and the institute's work.
I am very happy to do this. But also, if you could go to Agdan Governance Academy and on our website, and it's called Governance Files. It's on the section on Governance Files. We have that, and then the Sustainability Governance Scorecard that Dr. Agdan has just mentioned, that is also there, and that is more a research, and the governance files are more articles. So yes, I'm going to send it to the link, and you will be able to.
A note to our audiences, if you're interested in the topic, please do check out the excellent work that the Agdan Governance Research has been doing. So I noted that because AI is a horizontal technology, it can contribute meaningfully to growth in GDP. I also like the cautions that you strike about is AI going to make it a winner-take-all society? And we've seen that in the debates around the divergence between Wall Street versus Main Street fortunes, as they call it, the stock market performance versus the real economy. And also, I like the hopeful note about fintech helping fintech and AI working together to make finance more inclusive. So thank you for that. And we'll move to our next speaker, Mohan Kumar Prabhu, who is a director with the multinational financial risk mitigation insurance and health insurance giant Aon. So Mohan, take it away, please.
Thank you, Kashyap. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to all the other esteemed panelists as well. Just as Kashyap said, I'm a fellow CFA charter holder and fortunate enough to get the CFA when Paul was the president of the CFA Institute. And thanks, Paul. Really miss your leadership there. Also, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants for this webinar as well. My name is Mohan Kumar Prabhu, as Kashyap introduced. I currently work for Aon Consulting India as a director with their investment consulting offshore business. As part of our role as institutional advisors, we do advise clients on ESG and sustainability related matters for most of their responsible investment activities, right? Things like selecting one or more SDGs for setting up social and environmental objectives of a pension fund, or using SDGs in their engagement activities and things like that. So that's how I'm primarily connected to this industry. I'll be using today's opportunity to talk about Sdg Goal 9, and this deals with building a resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation. The Goal 9, and it's Goal 9, Sdg 9, this has what we call as 5 outcome-based targets and 3 means of implementation targets, right? And the sustainability outcomes this goal tries to achieve are with providing equitable and affordable access to people, particularly in marginalized societies, poor people, small farmers, to good infrastructure pathways as well as to digital pathways. Second is to significantly raise industry share as part of the GDP, right? Also, and specifically in developing countries, seeing how we can double that. The third one is to increase the credit access and access to financial services for small scale and medium scale industries. The fourth one is to adoption of clean and environmental sound technologies and industrial processes. And fifth one is to enhance scientific research and upgrade technological capabilities of industrial sectors in all countries. Right now, the means of implementing these outcomes and targets are primarily revolving around providing enhanced financial, technological, and technical support to the least developed countries, as well as to developing countries. Supporting the technological development, research, and innovation in developing countries, and also increasing access to information and communication technology in least developing countries. Now, why has this been very important? I personally believe that industrialization and sustainable industrialization has been one of the core drivers of the global development agenda. And given the recent economic realities, changing economic landscape, I would make a strong case that sustained growth must include a lot of industrialization supported by innovation and resilient infrastructure. If you really look at what has happened in the past few years and look at some of the data, for small scale industries, only 35% of the small scale industries in developing countries have access to credit. In least developed countries, probably 19% of the people use internet, right? Whereas if you compare it to developed economies, 89% of the people use internet. Manufacturing growth, which is very critical for sustained development, has been steadily declining in the past few years, which of course with COVID has exacerbated, decreasing the overall share of the industry as a percentage of GDP. Now that's one of the critical goals of Sdg Goal 9, is to increase the share of industry as a percentage of GDP, which I'm sure will get impacted with this COVID crisis. So how can AI help in solving some of these challenges, right? Whereas I believe that there are inhibitors, there are reasons to believe that AI can be disruptive to some of these goals, I also believe that AI can also be an enabler. Some of the applications, right, such as can there be AI applications which help to measure geospatial data, right? So one of the goals under SDG Goal 9 has been to see what is the population which stays within a range of 2 kilometers close to a proper road, right? Now, can we use AI applications to measure geospatial data, understand population distribution, road location, road passability, things like that, and help improve that metric and help improve that SDG goal, right? The second can be digitizing social and administrative services. Meaning, can we make all the government services available to the marginalized society more faster in a more digital way and more easily, right? That's again related to one of the SDG goals under Goal 9. Can there be applications which help industries integrate with the circular economy, right? We have been growing in the past few years in a what we call the linear economy, the take, make, and dispose kind of economy. Can we look at applications which helps those industries move into a more circular economy? Then for small scale industries, right, one of the goals, as I mentioned, was to look at how we can enable small scale industries and increase the share in the GDP. Can there be AI applications which helps create platforms for small scale industries to enable better credit access? One is that. And second is enable them to integrate themselves well with global supply chains or to local consumers, right? So things like e-commerce platforms which are already there, like Meesho and Etsy and Shopify, they do some of the stuff there. But can we look at bigger scales for even the least developed countries and developing economies? The last one, can we look at low-cost platforms which provides feedback loop on consumption data back to these small-scale manufacturers, which then will enable them to manage their stock inventory, production, make their industry processes much more efficient, things like that, right? So those are some of the examples which I could think of, which can enable some of these goals. As I said, I still believe that AI has a tendency to hinder some of these goals as well. I strongly believe that when the disruptive effects of an emerging technology is either faster or greater than the productive benefit of a particular technology, there are going to be inequalities. There are going to be social inequalities which may rise and disruptions which will be there. And we do see that in the last 30 years, right? Increasing populism, nationalistic fervors in most countries, things like that. So we need a coordinated effort to make sure that whatever policies we make with respect to AI implementation across all these SDG goals needs to be well coordinated. And since we are in a multilateral system, I think the global coordination needs to be much more better and faster. I will close there. And Kashyap, thanks, and hand it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Mohan. I liked your separation of what needs to be done with respect to large industry versus a small scale industry, and also the call to urgency because of the lack of access to credit and the lack of access to basic infrastructure like internet to large sections of our population. So we'll come back to some of these things. So I also noted that you urged this caution between the growing divide between the digital haves and the digital have-nots. Something that we need to be cautious of. So in this round, next up is Professor Nazri, who needs no introduction to this audience. So Professor, I was on a panel last couple of days ago when Professor Nazri was asking me the questions. He was moderating that panel, and now it's my turn. The tables are reversed.
Absolutely.
So Professor Nazri, please take it away.
Yes, thank you very much, Kashyap. I think it's an honor to be associated with all of you. And I'm very, very pleased to be able to share some of the key aspects of what we do that involves SDG 3 and 4 pertaining to health and education. The role of SDG 3 and 4 has a certain meaning to us because we are involved in some of the projects here in Malaysia involving the low-income population, B40 population, they call it, that covers about 2.8 million people who is under the poverty line. We talk about the student population. We work with 30 over universities that covers close to few 100,000 student population. So education is an important part of it. And when it comes to healthcare, there's about more than 100,000 over patients, and mostly under the poverty line that are affected with diabetes type 1 and type 2 collectively. So AI plays an important role in this. The role of AI in big data plays a catalytic role for change in these two sectors, two SDGs that we talked about. So my presentation, which incorporates the second round of the session, would cover the case studies and the use cases on how we use this as a catalyst for change. And there's always been a struggle for technologies and stakeholders alike in general in the healthcare system about maintaining that optimal balance between upstream type of technologies, okay, and downstream type of technologies. So we talk about upstream kind of AI technologies. This would include the policies, the programs, the data, collective data that is gathered around a certain trend, certain sector, and certain what do you call that, considerations or effects arising from certain policies and programs, right? On the downstream side, we always put people first. We think of people as the beneficiaries and the recipients of the AI technologies that we talked about. And central to this is that I must emphasize that AI cannot work if there's no digitized data. There's no data that is digitized and transformed from the manual basis of doing things. So there are a couple of things here that is going on, but essentially my problem statement starts off with the fact that more than half of the world lacks access to essential health services, and 100 million still push into extreme poverty because of health expense. So there are three elements within this statement here. Number one is about accessibility to essential health services. Second is about the affordability, i.e., their financial position that inhibits them from getting the right treatment, so to speak. And the third part that is hidden inside here is the fact that we need to bring in the education component, not just about access of it, and also affordability side to it. So we believe that SDG 3 and 4 are intermixed, and as per any other SDG goals, they are interrelated. So, but for purposes of this presentation, I will try my best to bring in the strategic role of AI and big data before you can actually do any form of real impact. And in doing so, we're going to share with you a series of AI cases involving these two tracks. Yeah. So I'm going to go through many visual slides to give you some idea about how AI is being used as a catalyst. So there are many sources of data coming from the healthcare sector, right? You can get it from the software, you can get it from the non-retail outlets, you can get it from the wearables, you can get it from pharmacy claims and so on and so forth. So this is a non-exhaustive list. So data is fragmented, it's everywhere. 80% of the data in the world are very unstructured, 20% is structured. So what we are having here is a case where you have data all over the place, it's very fragmented, and you need to categorize and segment them in such a way that you can make sense of them, okay, before you can actually deploy AI to its maximum potential. Now, how AI is being used, very simply explained, is the use of NLGU, natural language generation and understanding, as on the left-hand side, where we look at structured data, such as pharmaceutical data, medical data, patient records, dashboard statistics. Okay, so these are the types of information which can be manual, which can be in hard copies, but needs to be digitized before you can be plugged into the NLGU machine to analyze the structured data. And the right-hand side, we talk about the NLPUs, right? Natural language processing and understanding, where 80% of data actually exists in unstructured form. So here you can talk about news, medical publication, news and social media, hospital policies and procedures that comes in, comes out, right? Press releases, customer documents, and so on. So the role of AI that sits in the middle will be the machine learning. So when you talk about the lefts and the rights of the technologies that you see in front with the middle as a brain, you have to train the machine, and these are all readily available in different ways and forms, different stage of development, where it's divided into, Kashyap talks about narrow and general AI earlier on, right? So now I put an additional dimension to it, right? It talks about weak AI, moderate, and strong AI. So weak AI talks about just describing things, benchmarking, profiling, tiering them, and so on. So it's just giving you a dashboard of the situation as it is. Then it gets to become moderate AI, where it starts to explain the causality, the drivers for certain things to happen, right? And then it moves to what stronger type of AI that is to predict the situation of you entering into a particular, achieving a certain outcome. What's the probability of certain things happening, for example. And then stage 4 will be recommending action. AI can mimic the human brain, not just to solve routine problem, but to solve complex situations. And then last but not least is the ability to take on new data, not just historical, new data, and run the engine and run the equation and run the regression and then project forward. So this is in a snapshot how AI can give good insights for healthcare purposes. And then some of our use cases include, and in this case, we do run some projects with the dialysis centers, with hospitals, with clinics, and how to transform their current CRM or patient database system into something more predictive and prescriptive. So you cannot detach the element of financial planning in all of your treatment of your patients, right? This is the message we give to the healthcare providers. So in here, AI can actually help to analyze the effects of medication, predict socioeconomic outcomes, come out with a personalized healthcare roadmap, right? Try to analyze medical history, health conditions, and start to plan forward, what kind of resources are needed, what kind of insurance coverage that are needed, what kind of plight are they in, and then indicate how far are they from the poverty line or from the severity of the medical treatment that they need. So these are the kind of things that we deal with, and these are the kind of things that we believe what SDG 3 is all about. It's about making accessibility, affordability to healthcare by helping to create robo-advisors. Personalized patient care is the name of the game. So we need to have personalized care to all types of people who needs medical treatment in different degree of attention, right? And the way forward is actually to have a holistic approach. You cannot detach education, health, and wealth together, right? So sometimes when people wish you, right, they always say, oh, wish you the best of health and wealth during your birthdays, during New Year's and all that. So same thing, in practice, we cannot delink the relationship between financial planning with healthcare and education to ensure affordability and accessibility. So AI in financial planning is very important, but before I go to that part, I just want to show you another example where we can actually see how deep the tech can be. Let me try to share very quickly of a particular report. Okay, can you see the screen here? So this is an example of a specialized project that we are currently doing for a hospital and medical university, is to look at the dialysis, effectiveness of dialysis treatment of patients on a preventive way as well as a reactive way, so to speak. That means those who are already under treatment and those who are likely to go into treatment. Whatever you see here is all system generated, where after you feed the basic, structured and unstructured data, as I mentioned earlier, it can give you an overall scan and interpretation of your head to toe and your internal organs, right? And then it goes into analyzing your height, weight, lean body mass, body fat mass, and the system actually automatically create the analysis for you. And you can see also the metabolic syndrome risk that exists within your system. So you can see that it's beyond your kidney, but factors around what makes your body tick or switch off, right? And the level of risk that you're involved with. Now, this analysis that you see here is given mainly to the medical practitioners, but a more diluted, watered-down version can certainly be provided to the patients for them to take care of their health through wearables, through triggers, through signals, and through like a robo-advisor for health. Right, so you can see how the conditions of your internal organs and your external physiological status. Okay, so again, without the doctor having to key in or write a report, the system picks up all the facts, picks up all the data from the machine or from all the medical devices and translate this into narrative insights. And it does not just tell you what happened, it tells you why did it happen, what can happen in the future, what needs to be done. So the implication of this is you ensure with technology, right? You ensure that everybody will get a diagnosis, everybody will get early treatment, everybody will get some preventive steps or intervention steps before they become serious. In fact, the medical fraternity, the nephrologist community even have statistics, for example, they can actually predict 2 years before your kidney fails, right? How to take preventive actions before that actually happens. So if you buy any of those Fitbit devices and all that, they will give very basic stuff. But with AI, you can go deeper. And this is just a starting point, right? And then to keep you updated and connected with the news all over the world about that particular illness, disease, or trends, you can basically scrape the news, and then the news can be presented in such a way that they can see what is the trend on diabetes, for example. What is the latest development? 9,685 articles in the last 3 months. Who's going to read all articles, right? So with AI, you can basically summarize it. You can look at the emerging trends. You can look at the key news that affect you. So it becomes personalized news. Not only it is a personalized healthcare or roadmap, it's also a personalized news for you based on your conditions that you're in. And the list goes on and on and on, right? Now, moving on to the rest of my presentation, which is very brief. Last few slides. You can see that AI can also be used in financial planning. Again, no doubt we're talking about affordability and accessibility to healthcare and education, right? But here you can see that we can even predict the future about a person's socio-economic, financial position, wealth creation capabilities, scenarios in their lives. And this is not science fiction. This is something that has been rolled out to many, many individuals in Asia. And when you look at education, something exciting happens before they actually goes into university program. We help them to profile and predict the courses to take and the likelihood of them entering into a job and the quite starting pay they're getting and how they're going to spend their money based on their personality, lifestyle. So it provides some form of foresight about the kind of career that you want to get, starting pay, the kind of personalized student learning roadmap. Personalized learning roadmap is what we are talking about. So everybody has different methods of studying. Everybody has the same exam to attend, for example. So in this case, the Robo AI, the Robo Advisor for Education actually provides a personalized learning for you to take care of the subjects that you learn. You may be good and you love auditing, but you may not like taxation in your modules that you studied. And then the AI will pick up the right mentors to guide you in audit and to try to motivate you in tax, for example. So in this case, education takes a different level to motivate whether you're in rural or urban areas. It makes it inclusive. It makes AI democratized. Everybody can have access to it. Everybody has access to the right mentors, right teachers all over the world via an integrated digitized system. So my last slide here is talking about the use of AI to gain foresight. The core crux, the crux of this presentation is about having that foresight. Before foresight can happen, you must have the digitized data, right? So at the end of the day, you want to have an overall, you have to attain an overall well-being, a good well-being, excellent well-being in terms of education, how you manage your resources, and then subsequently to your health. So with that, I pass it over to you. Kashyap, thank you so much for moderating this.
Thank you, Professor Nazri. And I think you painted a very good picture and also a lot of details of how actually these are being implemented right now. So that you mentioned Fitbit devices, personalized healthcare, I agree with all of that. So one thought that comes to me is like I have this Apple Watch. It's fascinating. A lot of senior citizens, they fall down every year. Millions of senior citizens fall down and nobody is able to reach out to them. So there is a fall detection. So somebody falls down, the Apple Watch can send an SOS to the thing. So it seems like a simple application, but that would not have been possible without AI. There is a lot of complex data crunching, how to avoid false positives, false negatives, etc. It's also fascinating to think that in addition to things like that, it also has an ECG machine. Like my Apple Watch here has an ECG machine which can detect irregular heart patterns. Fascinating to think about it. But at the same time, wonderful innovation, but the cost of the watch plus the phone is equal to the per capita income in my country. So the challenge before us is to really, how do we make sure it's affordable? How do we make it inclusive, etc.? So that is like for the governments and the civil societies to make sure there is this wonderful innovation that AI and other technologies enable. But how do we make it much more widely affordable and spread? So thank you. Right, thanks.
Very quick response to that, Kashyap, is a very relevant point, right? It's about affordability. So whoever are the manufacturers of technology, they must be able to absorb the capex. Okay, just like we do. You know, when you want to democratize AI, you have to absorb the capex, and you have to bring it down to a level that there's going to be concession attached to it, number one, by the government, for example, because there has to be a PPP kind of model, right? To make sure that it's of national interest to make it affordable and accessible. But the producer of such technology must start off first, because they're the price setter. They must think long term. They must bring it down to the level that it's spread over a number of years, 10, 20, 30 years for your recovery of your so-called investments upfront, right? And this is what the smaller players, the tech players, are starting to do. They move from capex to opex, right? As you know, SaaS-based and all that. And the big boys have no choice to do the same. So this has sort of changed since 2017, when some of the big boys, without naming who they are, they actually started moving from capex to opex-based model and try to make it on a per call or per API basis and all that. But even then, it will not be sustainable for the business. The developmental agencies are going to come forward, the funding agencies are going to come forward, the government going to come forward and figure out a way where a public-private partnership model can make sure that this particular issue is addressed. So you can't certainly charge commercial rates to the rural side, no way. Okay, even for the sandwich middle class, the ROI, so to speak, right, the cost of purchasing it versus their current income level may not justify that. So the producers, the producers of technology got to think backwards, right? Reverse engineer the whole thing and work out the mechanics of it to make it affordable. Instead of charging it $20, you have to think whether you can charge it at 90 cents, for example. It's that drastic that you got to think about. And it's possible. It's very possible to work out your mechanics. It's just about extending the duration of your capex and then get support and incentives along the way. And government got to play a role in that, because if it's of strategic national issue, then they got to incentivize such innovation to manifest itself and make it pervasive in the country that needs it most. Okay, so that's my short comment to that.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. It's like, it's not just technological innovation, but you also need financial innovation to make things affordable. So with that, we've had a fantastic round one. And now I'm going to invite Paul Smith to speak about a topic that is close to his heart, gender equality. Paul, I know you may have a stop, but please take it.
No problem, Keshav. Thanks very much. I think this is close to my heart, as you say. I've got 3 daughters and 5 sisters, so I've always grown up in a very female dominated home. So gender equality has been something that I've always been interested in more ways than one. And at CFA, when I was there, we did a huge amount of work around that, a great deal of research around gender equality, and so I think we've done a huge amount really based around the simple idea of cognitive diversity. So obviously it's important to say about this SDG that access for women, equality for women, of opportunity, of pay, of representation is the core of the goal. But really, when you think about gender equality, you have to start with the simple insight that gender equality is essentially fair. But in finance, we tried to say, well, we need to go beyond simple fairness to say, how can you attach gender equality to a good that finance can see, touch, and measure, so that it will encourage firms to have more enlightened diversity policies. And in finance, that was simply around this idea of cognitive diversity. With cognitive diversity, you're likely to be able to solve complex problems, such as the ones that we face in finance, much more successfully. And so having cognitive diversity in your organization will help produce better outcomes, whether you're an investment manager or investment bank, et cetera, et cetera. And as both Kuba and myself mentioned earlier, better outcomes from finance are absolutely essential, because finance as a discipline really lacks investor trust. And so trying to reconnect with investors through better outcomes is vitally important. And this is where AI can play a role. As Dr. Agdan said earlier on today, the measurement and analysis of the data around gender diversity and cognitive diversity is something that we've only just really begun to scratch the surface at. So although I think people intellectually can understand the argument behind cognitive diversity, there hasn't been enough data collection and data analysis to really prove out those conversations with enough certainty to lead more businesses down the road of gender diversity. And in finance particularly, we have very, very low levels of female participation. The other couple of things on that subject that I would say that are absolutely important to this debate is that 50% of the world's population is women, for sure. And in 10 years' time, something like 60% of the world's savings will actually be in the hands of women. And I think that's very important. That's because men tend to die on average slightly earlier than women do. So women are gradually gaining more than parity in terms of controlling savings. And also women, on average, generalizations in this area are always fraught with difficulty, but women in general are much more interested in the ESG, the sustainability, the SDG debate than men are. Roughly speaking, 6-4 in terms of proportionality when one surveys women to men. So women are an extremely important investor base going forward, and how we can access and harness that is extremely important. Obviously, this SDG is much broader than just finance. It's about, as I say, equal opportunity, equal reward, equal representation. And I think Dr. Nasri touched on some of the key areas there. First and foremost, obviously, education. Women are dramatically underrepresented in STEM subjects. In developing countries, they also have restricted access often to education. And AI can not only help with access, but it also can help tailor-make education in two senses. One, in terms of what you're learning, but secondly, in terms of how you learn. Everybody has different ways of absorbing information, and AI is extremely important within the education field for making sure that content not only is accessible, but is also tailored and delivered in a way that the student will find it most helpful. Finance, again, Dr. Nasri touched upon microfinance. It's a well-established fact that women are better credit risks than men. And they tend to pay back loans at an astonishing rate. Something like 98% of all microfinance loans made to women are actually repaid. And again, artificial intelligence can really help with access, tailored lending, cheaper credit extension as a result of the analysis of the data, like the points that I've just mentioned, and obviously tailor-made insurance for the businesses that women support through microfinance lending. So big data really has a huge amount to offer in terms of helping women get better access to finance, to credit at the right price to help them extend their financial responsibility, financial independence, and also help support their families and their wider communities. Healthcare, again, we've touched upon that a great deal, but healthcare that's tailored to women as well is a vitally important aspect of artificial intelligence that will help women lead longer, happier lives. Language analysis, I think, also has a role to play in terms of gender equality, whether you think about things like advertising, for instance, job advertising specifically, language analysis of adverts that help make sure that biases are ironed out. That also has a role to play in terms of law formulation as well, when legislatures are putting new laws together to make sure that they are being analysed properly, that the language used within them is not creating bias or establishing different prejudices. So language analysis has a big role to play here as well. The challenges are the obvious ones: data privacy, clearly bias as well. So many algorithms, so much of artificial intelligence is written by men. And we have to accept that there are almost certainly some cognitive biases around a lot of the way that artificial intelligence applications are used today. So we need to do a better job of making sure that AI is not entrenching prejudice, it's helping prevent it. Herding, I would say, is another challenge, particularly in the financial services world, that the sorts of applications that one develops through AI may actually promote behaviors that go to an extreme. And you can think about that in terms of trading techniques, for instance. Through herding, you can create impacts in the marketplace that go to an extreme rather than create a more even spread of investment opportunity. And finally, I would say that there's a lot of study going on at the moment that AI is more likely to displace women's roles than it is men's, partly because a lot of women occupy administrative roles, and therefore they're likely to be the initial losers behind AI. So in an effort to make sure that we are actually preserving opportunity, we need to think quite carefully about how we phase AI in to make sure that its negative impacts on employment are properly resolved through education and through other opportunities that women will be afforded in the new economy as it develops over the next few years. So Kashyap, I'm going to end that out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, I really appreciate how you painted both the positives and the negatives. And I think there is a lot of work. Like, as you've pointed out, women are better credit risks, women are more prudent in general. Generalizations are risky, but in general, they're more prudent with financial planning, etc. But there are some highly publicized cases, say with Apple, for example, where they denied credit card to a woman. Their algorithms, not Apple, but the algorithms that they developed. So still a lot of work for the AI and the technology community to do. It also, like you highlighted, disproportionately affecting certain categories of jobs because of AI. So still a lot of work to be done. Your comment set the stage perfectly for Mohan to talk about inequality in general. That's his next goal he's going to talk about. Mohan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kashyap. Yeah, so the goal which I will talk about next is goal. It primarily deals with reducing inequality within and among countries. I think Paul covered the gender equality bit well in the other goal. This goal has what we call 7 outcome-based targets and tries to deal with sustainability outcomes relating to income growth of the bottom 40% of the population. How can we sustain the income growth of the 40% of the population at a rate which is higher than the national average? That's one of the goals. Second is to promote social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, things like that. Eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation and policies. Adopting policies specifically related to fiscal and wage policies to progressively achieve greater equality, right? And this is specifically in the context of income equality, which we measure by the Gini coefficient, right? So we have been successful in the past few years to reduce that, especially in developed countries. But due to the COVID and due to some of the the recent economic recessionary tendencies, there is going to be a big effect on this, right? And the second aspect of that has also been to increase the labor share of GDP, which again may go down because of some of the changes which has happened in this year. The fifth point is regulation and monitoring of global financial markets and institutions, and this is particularly important in the context of developing countries where there has been tendency for financial institutions, especially in India. If you look at it, the NPA to gross loan ratio in the last few years has been steadily growing up, and that's something which I think we need to look at as one of the goals as well. The sixth one is enhanced representation and voice for developing countries in decision making in global economic and financial institutions. This is also a representation in multilateral agencies and bodies, right? And the last one is to facilitate an orderly, safe, and regular and responsible migration and mobility of people, right? How do we have more planned and well-managed migration policies within countries or among countries? The way we can implement some of these measures relate to providing differential treatment for tariff lines for developing countries and to the least developed countries, encouraging official development assistance, what we call the ODAs, and the OFFs, the financial flows, including FDIs to states where the need may be the greatest. And also one of the goals has been to reduce the transaction cost for migrant remittances to less than 3%, right? And also the cost higher, whichever are more than 5% to completely eliminate that. So these are some of the goals. Why has this goal been extremely important? Because as we understand, inequality threatens long-term social and economic development. It definitely has a tendency to harm poverty reduction and people's sense of fulfillment and self-worth. Now this in turn, if it kind of festers in economies, can breed social unrest, disease, crime, and environmental degradation. We have seen some of the effects of these in the last 30 years, right? Once technological disruptions have started coming in through internet and things like that, we do see inequalities, which then results into, which takes the shape of populism, national fervor, which we discussed in the past as well. So these are some of the issues why we need to reduce inequalities. How can AI help in some of these aspects? One of the goals, as I said, has been to regulate financial institutions and strengthen those financial institutions in developed countries. Can fintech applications do that? That's something which we can look at, right? Second can be fintech applications to reduce the cost of money transfer and also remittance processes, right? So if one of the goals has been to reduce the number to less than 3%, can we look at technologies, both AI and blockchain, to reduce the cost around that? Can RegTech applications strengthen financial institutions more from a regulatory aspect? So that's a question to be asked. Another example can be for migration policies. Can we improve migration policies through better data collation, through secondary source of information, right? Like social media, testimonies, forensic data, government records. Collate this data to see how we can improve migration policies. Another example can be automatic knowledge extraction and pattern recognition to improve data and better inform risk related to unsafe migration. There has been a lot of news in the past when people have taken boats to move from African countries into European countries, and boats have sinked and have unsafe migration practices, right? So can AI help in mitigating things like that? Also, development of better data mining and machine learning techniques for prediction of certain events, such as predicting offender or recidivist behaviors. Can that help in reducing inequalities and within the countries itself? Now, those can be some of the examples. What can be some of the challenges with AI? And the goal number 10 with respect to inequalities, I think AI plays a huge challenge in only increasing inequalities. We covered some in the past as well, in terms of how the digital divide of haves and have-nots can come in because of AI. That's one major part. The second, automation shifts whenever it happens, right? It has a tendency to increase the corporate income of the owners of companies rather than the people who work there, right? So that's going to be a huge challenge in terms of creating that income equality between people. Second, we may rely heavy on data and analysis for AI systems to work, and developing countries may not have that data, right? So how do we ensure developing countries have the data and analysis to for these AI systems to work well in those economies, right? The third can be that these are technologies which get implemented with, and I think Kashyap covered this in terms of ethics and values. They get implemented in countries with different culture, values, and wealth, right? So does that create trust deficits within nations? Right? So that's another question which we need to ponder about. The fourth can be in terms of replacing old jobs, which of course will require more skills, right? So AI has a tendency to replace existing or old jobs, and that can disproportionately disrupt existing jobs and create avenues for new people, but that may be in much lesser scope, right? So lesser number of people getting employed and higher number of people getting dislocated. So these are some of the points or challenges which we need to think about as well. And I'll close with that statement. Thanks, Kashyap.
Thank you, Mohan. And I think one of the important things that I want to highlight from your points is that the need for putting together a good data infrastructure in place, particularly by the emerging economies, so that we have a good baseline for the measurements that we've been hearing about, etc. So we can make progress towards that. Thank you for that. So next, I was in Davos at the beginning of this year, and at that gathering, it's the superstars are the big heads of states, big corporations, and everybody is there. But at Davos 2020, the person who everybody wanted to meet and see and get a glimpse of was a 13-year-old climate change activist. I know who you're talking about. I think you know who I'm talking about. So that's the next sustainability development goal that we're going to be talking about. And I invite Kubra to talk about climate change SDG and what we can do about it. Kubra, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kasha. Okay, so I will talk about climate change, SDG 13, but just because it's also so much interconnected with climate change, I will also refer to SDG 15, which is focused on biodiversity. So SDG 13 takes, let me just explain what they are. SDG 13 takes action to reduce impact from climate change. And SDG 15 takes action to protect, restore, promote ecosystems, manage forests, reverse land degradation, and biodiversity loss. So this time, if that's okay, I will start with some action points to promote those, how to promote those two SDGs. And then I would like to also, again, provide an example to demonstrate why these two SDGs are very important and how they are interconnected to each other. So first of all, again, from the financial service sector, professionals should take steps to measure, reduce, and report climate exposure. Then they should promote financial products that mitigate climate risk, such as green bonds. They should integrate climate risks into underwriting practices or into their investment analysis. They should disclose carbon footprints in investment portfolios. And they should use innovative financing options to preserve and restore forests. And finally, also valuing ecosystem services, what the value they are offering us. So finding and sharing tools to increase that understanding, just to signal why it's so crucial that we protect those natural habitats. As a response now to this round, I wish, also providing an example, I wish to talk about something nicer. So rainforests, nature, and a little bit about the animal world, and also in particular about tigers. I want to talk about tigers because first of all, they are very popular. Everyone loves taking pictures with them on social media. But even more importantly, actually tigers play a very key role in our ecosystem. And the fact that that they are a species currently threatened by extinction and that we keep moving them from their natural habitats is actually extremely counterproductive to all the efforts we are doing for climate action. And if that's okay, I would like to elaborate a little bit on that. So studies indicate, first of all, why is climate change so crucial and why is climate change and biodiversity so interconnected to each other? Studies indicate that about 1 million species are now threatened with extinction through wildlife poaching, environmental degradation, and global warming. First of all, we need to understand that natural systems, such as rainforests, are very complex systems. So all species actually fulfill a certain role in that system. Therefore, when even one species gets lost, there's a reduction in the system connectivity. This then reduces the ability of our natural systems, such as forests, for example, to deal with global warming and with absorbing the emissions that are coming from humans. The second thing is about temperature changes. Due to very rapid changes in temperatures, species have to adapt to new climate conditions and they have to adapt very fast. One of the ways that these animals or plants can cope with this is to migrate. However, while this is feasible for some animals, highly mobile species such as fish or insects, many slower moving animals or especially plants, for example, also coral reefs, it's simply not possible for them to adapt to this type of fast changing temperatures. Which is why there are so many species that are really on the brink of extinction. Now, same thing can happen and is happening with the loss of predator animals such as tigers and lions. When those predator animals are removed from their natural habitats, their loss can actually lead to an increase in the environmental degradation. Why? Because when they are removed, the population of the grazing animals, such as deer, due to the absence of the predators, will increase. And what happens is that this often leads to further biodiversity loss, because forests are not being able to regenerate themselves as effectively, because those grazing animals are eating the young trees. So, so this is just to demonstrate to you how extremely connected everything is with each other. And so when we do climate action, we also at the same time have to make sure that we are protecting and preserving the environment, restoring the environment. And while we are doing all that, we also need to put the right legislation and the regulation to reduce and eliminate that wildlife trafficking as well. Unfortunately, wildlife trade of exotic animals at the moment is not good, although there are some measures being taken as we speak. But this poaching of wild animals is a serious issue, including for tigers. In fact, it's an eye-opening fact that there are more tigers in captivity in the United States at the moment than out there in the wild all over the world. So many governments, including the US, lack a central accountable agency to detect tigers that are held in captivity, and they don't know what's really happening to them. But there are measures that are being put in place now to change this. So just as this example shows, these days we are increasingly finding ourselves in situations that has to remind us how our world is highly interconnected. Our recommendation, therefore, is not to look at things in isolation, but look at things from a system approach. And this is how we should try to solve those nature-related problems. And in all of that, where does AI stand? Well, maybe there are some cases where AI could really be helpful here, simply because of the technology. For example, some technologies could become more effective in fighting that wildlife animal trafficking. And also, I think there's remote sensing that really helps detection in a much more effective level. And then also, artificial intelligence can help determine, for example, how land usage is changing, where the rainforests are growing and where they are shrinking, etc. So there are really some very cool tools that AI could provide, and hopefully those could help us deal with climate change, with biodiversity, and really trying to solve those problems in a meaningful way, and finding solutions for all of them at the same time.
Thank you, Kubra, for painting that optimistic picture. So obviously, clearly, we have eyes in the sky, which can, when combined with the supercomputing and AI data sets, we're able to do a much better job of detecting patterns of land usage pattern, detecting where poaching is happening, etc. So there is hope. So we have saved our best for the last part of this panel. As each of the panelists has said, there is clearly a need to do solutions on each of the challenges is interconnected. So there is a need to come together and revitalize the partnership on the global challenges. So I invite Dr. Agdan to talk about the partnerships that are needed. How do we do that? The goal 17, which will make all of this happen.
Thank you, Kashyap. I think it was a very interesting panel. I really appreciate sitting together with these very knowledgeable colleagues. As I mentioned earlier, the SDGs have 169 indicators. UN has classified these indicators into 3, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 is, there is an adapted, widely accepted measurement tool for that particular target. and that it is applied throughout the world very broadly. Tier 2 is either there isn't a very widely accepted tool or it's not applied properly. Tier 3, it's neither. Neither do we have a good methodology, nor are we applying it altogether. Furthermore, in selection of these targets, something that could be measurable was considered. Therefore, not all the measures are measuring the intended results fully properly. So there is that element as well. I think that AI could really help, particularly in Tier 2 and Tier 3 applications, in terms of making them measurable and making Tier 1 targets measured more cost-effective manner. However, when we come to the partnerships, I think that's very critical. SDG 17 is very critical. And one of the difficulties we are facing with the partnerships is that partnerships are quite multifaceted. NGOs, corporates, governments, local governments, national government, global institutions. It is very broad. Furthermore, most of the stakeholders are interested in some specific SDGs, not all of them at the same time. So when you say partnerships for all, you bring a big group of people together. They do not necessarily share all the same common interests or knowledge base or whatever. So I would like to conclude with a recommendation, this wonderful panel, and that is, I think we need to assign a calendar day for each SDG and make sure that relevant stakeholders gather to share content, create content, communicate that content, and collaborate to make the world better according to that particular SDG. So 3C model of collaboration, content creation, and communication would be critical based on every single SDG. And I have just sent you a link to give this recommendation a bit more meat. If people wanted to get that presentation, I think they can share it given the amount of time we have left just last minute. I don't want to go into any further. But these 3 C's, collaboration, content creation, and communication on specific targets by all the relevant stakeholders, not all stakeholders, but all the relevant stakeholders, I think will make a difference. And I'm sure the AI technology will help us do better, particularly with Tier 2 and Tier 3 indicators. If we don't measure them, we are not going to achieve the results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Auditing, and to the audiences, the SDG Goal a Day, Dr. Auditing has shared it in the chat panel, so please check it out because the job in front of us is so complex and it requires not a single day or a single panel, but it's an ongoing work. So thank you for that excellent recommendation. So with that, we come to the end of this excellent panel. There has been so much food for thought, so many ideas, and there is so much more that we really could have gone on for another two hours easily. So thanks to my excellent colleagues for their great insights and perspectives. Thank you for that.